Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise and get straight to the fascinating stuff.
Mhm.
You're here because you want to understand things deeply, to have those aha moments that stick without feeling, buried under an avalanche of information.
Yeah.
Consider us your Sherpas in the world of knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. And today we're diving headfirst into Filipino martial arts, or FMA. We're guided by the book Filipino Martial Arts as taught by Dan Inosanto, which is a real cornerstone resource. It's from way back in 1980, and it features some thoughtful insights from Gilbert L. Johnson right up front.
Right.
Now, the cover might show someone with a scoped firearm, which could give you one impression, maybe, but the reality of what's inside is much broader and I think you'll find surprisingly applicable.
Absolutely. And for you listening, prepare for some light bulb moments.
Yeah.
Think about Bruce Lee. The core ideas of FMA were a major influence on his legendary approach.
Yeah.
That adaptable way of moving and fighting, whether you're armed or using just your body, that's a central thread we'll be pulling on. Plus, there's this incredible, almost secret history to uncover. These arts weren't always, in the public eye in the Philippines, so we're getting a look at something with really deep roots.
Precisely. Our goal in this deep dive is to be your informed guides through this book. We're going to extract the key historical context, how these arts came to be, the fundamental principles that underpin them, and the methods Inosanto lays out for training. Think of this as your streamlined path to understanding the essence of this incredibly dynamic martial art.
Okay, let's start by unwrapping that history then. The book really emphasizes the long tradition of resistance in the Philippines and how their martial arts naturally developed as a way to protect themselves. When you think about it, when survival is on the line, people get incredibly innovative.
Yeah, and what's particularly interesting is the point the book makes about the time before any significant foreign influence. It mentions that martial arts were just a part of life then, practiced openly. It was woven into the culture without the need for secrecy that would come later.
And then the Spanish colonization happened. The book details how this period really acted as a forge for FMA. We see the rise and refinement of bladed weapons. They specifically mention the kris, that wavy-bladed sword, and the everyday bolo knife.
Right, the bolo.
There's even an image in the book showing a collection of these Moro weapons, which really brings home how central edged weapons were. It's a powerful example of how conflict shapes the tools and techniques of self-defense.
It really is. If we connect this to a broader historical understanding, you see this repeated pattern across different cultures when faced with new threats, combat methods evolve. The Filipinos were no exception. The book highlights how they even turned everyday tools into weapons. It speaks to incredible resourcefulness, doesn't it?
It's almost a form of applied ingenuity born out of necessity. Really smart. And it wasn't just formalized weapons. The book also touches on the guerrilla warfare tactics employed by Filipinos. Imagine facing that kind of determined, close-quarters fighting, often with blades. It really paints a picture of their resilience.
And this raises a fascinating point about how deeply these skills were integrated into society. The book explains that martial arts weren't just for a warrior class. They were part of everyday life, starting with games children played.
Really.
Yeah, these weren't just fun. They were subtly teaching movement patterns and coordination essential for self-defense. It makes you think about how culture can transmit vital skills almost unconsciously.
That's a perspective you don't often consider, that childhood play can be a form of practical training. Wow. And then there's the element of secrecy. The book contrasts that historical need for secrecy, perhaps to protect their knowledge from colonizers, maybe, with the fact that this information is now much more accessible, largely due to the efforts of instructors like Dan Inosanto. It's like a hidden world is now being brought into the light.
Exactly. And what's so significant about Inosanto is his role as a connector. He has a rich lineage in martial arts and, crucially, was deeply influenced by Bruce Lee. The book clarifies that Lee's Jeet Kune Do wasn't meant to be another fixed style, but rather a philosophy, a way of approaching combat that emphasizes principles over rigid forms.
And it sounds like Inosanto really embraced that philosophy. The book emphasizes his way of teaching core principles that you can then apply across different styles and with a variety of weapons. It's less about memorizing a specific sequence and more about understanding the fundamental mechanics of movement, the why behind it all, which ultimately simplifies things.
Exactly. His teaching approach, as it's described, is about continuous learning and adapting the instruction to the individual student. The focus is always on the underlying principles, the core mechanics, rather than just a fixed set of techniques. There's a telling story in the book about him demonstrating a movement without even knowing if the student was left or right-handed. Yeah, that really underscores his focus on universal principles of movement.
That speaks to a deep level of mastery, doesn't it? And the book also provides valuable insights into the masters who shaped Inosanto's understanding. We get these first-hand accounts and excerpts about Angel Cabales, Ben Largusa, and Floro Villabril. It's like getting a multi-generational view of how FMA evolved and was taught.
Definitely. And what's particularly illuminating about these different masters is how their unique backgrounds and experiences influence their particular approach to the arts. For instance, the book mentions how Angel Cabala's environment in Alaska, believe it or not, played a role in shaping his perspective.
Alaska, wow.
Yeah, it's a detail that really highlights how context can influence even seemingly traditional practices.
Right. You think of these arts originating in a tropical climate, and then you have a master whose experience included the Alaskan environment. It's a powerful reminder that context is everything. And then there's Ben Largusa, with his strong emphasis on decadina, which translates to the chain or the flow.
Yeah, on the flow.
This idea of continuous linked movement, which sounds absolutely fundamental to the art's efficiency.
And Floro Villabril, whose intense and demanding training methods are noted in the book. It paints a picture of a very dedicated and perhaps uncompromising teacher. These glimpses really give you a sense of the diverse streams of influence that converged in Inosanto's teaching.
Okay, so we've explored the historical roots and the lineage of instructors. Now let's get into the real nuts and bolts, the core principles and concepts. The book introduces the idea of striking angles and even mentions a numbering system, although we don't get the specifics in these excerpts. But it's clear that understanding these lines of attack is a fundamental aspect.
Yeah, definitely. And what's key here are the four basic striking motions that the book lays out. You have the long arc, that big sweeping motion, the shortened arc, which is a more compact, closer range version, the rap, which is described as a percussive blow that returns along the same path, and then the direct thrust or jab. The book even includes illustrations of these, which really helps you visualize the differences.
And it's not just about the direction the strike comes from, is it? The book talks about torque and how absolutely vital it is for generating power in those strikes. Think of it like wringing out a wet towel. That twisting motion, engaging your whole body, is what makes even a relatively small movement deliver significant force.
Exactly. Torque is huge. And then we have the alive hand, which is a really crucial concept in FMA. It's not a passive hand that just hangs there. Instead, it's actively involved in both offense and defense simultaneously. It could be checking an incoming attack, trapping an opponent's limb, or, getting ready for the next strike. It's like your second hand is always on alert and ready to contribute.
So it's like your offhand isn't just waiting its turn. It's an active participant in the entire exchange, constantly sensing and ready to act. That makes sense. The book also goes into locks and disarms, and the emphasis is on using leverage and targeting the weakest points of an opponent's grip. There are even some visual examples of wrist locks in the book's images, which make that principle much clearer. It's not about overpowering someone with strength, but using technique and understanding of joint mechanics.
Well, yeah, and what's important to grasp with locks and disarms in FMA is this focus on efficiency and targeting vulnerable points. It's not about brute force, it's about understanding how joints work and applying pressure in the right way to gain control.
And you can't talk about fighting, whether you have a weapon or not, without talking about footwork. The book highlights defensive footwork and the fundamental concept of moving off the line of attack. It sounds so basic, but mastering that ability to get out of the way is absolutely crucial for not getting hit.
Absolutely crucial.
Good footwork creates angles for your own attacks and disrupts your opponent's balance.
Absolutely. Good footwork isn't just about getting out of danger, it also creates opportunities. It helps you establish angles for your own offense and makes it harder for your opponent to predict your movements. And all these principles seem to come together in this broader idea of the flow that the book introduces. What were your thoughts on that concept?
The flow, as I understood it from the book, is this continuous redirecting movement. It's not about being static or sticking to one technique. It's about seamlessly transitioning between techniques, adapting to what your opponent is doing, whether you have a weapon or not. It's about maintaining momentum and not getting bogged down. It's almost like a dance, but with a very practical purpose.
That's a great analogy. It's about that fluidity and adaptability, being able to move smoothly from defense to offense and back again. It's a core element that really ties many of the individual techniques together into a cohesive system.
So how does one even begin to learn all of this? The book touches on training methodology. It mentions solo training, practicing movements on your own, and various partner drills as essential for developing the necessary skills.
Yeah, the
It
drills.
makes perfect sense. You need to put in the repetitions to build that muscle memory and those automatic responses.
Definitely. And while the excerpts don't delve deeply into environmental training, the fact that it's even mentioned suggests an understanding that your surroundings can and should be integrated into your training. It adds another dimension to the idea of adaptability, not just adapting to an opponent, but also to the environment you're in.
Huh. What I found particularly interesting is the book's emphasis on understanding the characteristics of weapons, even when you're practicing empty hand techniques. It's
Okay.
like the way a stick moves and can be used informs how you move your own body, even when you don't have a stick in your hand.
That's a really key insight. The idea is that by understanding the dynamics of a weapon, its reach, its cutting angles, its percussive potential, you gain a deeper understanding of range, timing, and angles in general. And that knowledge then enhances your empty hand skills. It's a very holistic approach to movement and combat.
Okay, so moving beyond the techniques and the history, the book also touches on some really profound philosophical ideas. There's this recurring theme that learning isn't a final destination, it's an ongoing journey of discovery, which is a concept that applies way beyond just martial arts, doesn't it?
Absolutely. What really stands out is the emphasis on personal discovery and the importance of questioning. The book presents the instructor more as a guide who facilitates learning rather than someone who just dictates knowledge. This encourages a constant process of inquiry, which leads to a much deeper level of understanding.
It's about actively opening your mind, as the book says, and fostering that continuous pursuit of knowledge. I also appreciated the broad definition of school. It's not just a formal training hall, but literally anywhere learning takes place. That really shifts your perspective on how and where you can learn.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when you get to the epilogue, the book takes a remarkably broad view, suggesting that the essence of martial arts, at least as presented here, goes far beyond just physical combat. It speaks to preserving cultural heritage, honoring the traditions of those who came before, and ultimately even understanding your place in the larger order of things. That's a pretty powerful takeaway.
It really is. So to wrap up in our deep dive, Filipino martial arts, as taught by Dan Inosanto, reveals a martial art with deep historical roots in Filipino resistance, a system that was shaped by cultural exchange and periods of conflict. We've seen how instructors like Inosanto champion a principle-based approach, emphasizing adaptable movement that's applicable whether you're armed or unarmed.
And for me, a detail that really resonates is the contrast between the historical secrecy surrounding FMA, perhaps for survival, right? And its current accessibility to people around the world. It's a compelling example of how knowledge can evolve and eventually be shared, or maybe even the subtle way childhood games could instill fundamental combat skills. It highlights how deeply ingrained these movements were in the culture.
That's such a great point. It really makes you think about the ways we learn and internalize skills, often without even consciously realizing it.
So for you, our listener, consider this. How might the principle-based approach we've discussed in FMA, focusing on fundamental mechanics that can be adapted to a wide range of situations, be valuable in your own life? Whether you're learning a new skill, tackling complex problems, or even just trying to navigate the constant flow of information. Perhaps true understanding in any area comes from that same spirit of continuous exploration and questioning that lies at the heart of this fascinating martial art.